born to a drug-addicted mother who spent most of her life in and out of the prison system. Mental health psychotherapist Deshaun Harris was a product of the foster care system throughout his childhood. Despite growing up in the rough streets of Baltimore, Deshaun overcame calamities, trials, and tribulations. Immediately after graduating high school, he pursued and obtained his BS degree in criminal justice. After that, he pursued and obtained his master's degree in counseling. Today, Mr. Harris will sit down with me, and we're talking Black men and mental health. What does that look like? What does that sound like? Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome to the Tyra Hill Show. I am your leading lady, Tyra Hill, and today I'm talking Black men and mental health. I am so excited about this conversation because if you know me, then you know that I am a mental health advocate. I am a therapy person. I believe in therapy. I live by it because there has been so much trauma in my life that I've had to grow through. And so when it comes to mental health, I want all of my brothers and sisters to be excited about it as I am. Is the journey painful? Absolutely. But is it rewarding? Most definitely. So today I get a dope opportunity to sit down and talk to one of my favorite mental health therapists. He goes by the name of Mr. Deshaun Harris, and today we're talking about it.
Yes, we are.
Deshaun, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here because it seems as if, listening to the fans, Tyra, you talk so much about mental health and Black women. When are you going to talk about mental health and Black men?
Absolutely.
And so being a mother of a Black man, being a nana of Black men, it's extremely important to me that we cut down that stereotype of Black men not wanting to get mental health help, you know. And so your story, oh my goodness. When I first found out about you and I read your story, I was like, he's been through the trenches.
Definitely.
He's been through some things. He's, I don't like to say go through. I like to say he's grown through a lot of things. Let's get into a little bit about who you are and where you came from.
Definitely.
I know, first of all, you came from the streets of Baltimore, correct?
Correct.
And your mother was an addict who was in and out of the penitentiary.
She was.
Let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about that.
So from the beginning, when my mother was pregnant with me, she was pregnant with each of my siblings. She was on drugs.
Okay.
That was her life, So when it came down to me, she was arrested for her drug addiction. She was also a well-known booster in Baltimore, so she was arrested plenty of times for those things. So she went to court, and the judge, thank God, the judge said to her, he said, "I'm going to save this child." His intent was to save me from her drug addiction, and he sentenced her to prison. So when she had me, she was in Towson Correctional Facility.
Oh my goodness! So whoa! I told y'all he has a story. Your mommy was pregnant with you.
Correct.
And how many siblings do you have?
3.
So you're the baby.
I have a younger sister.
Okay.
So, right before.
But at that time, you were the baby.
Right.
Okay, and so the judge says, I'm going to save this child, and I'm going to send you to prison. And you were born in prison.
Well, not technically, I wasn't born in prison because they took her to GBMC in Towson. So they took her to the hospital. So she had me in the hospital, but she went in labor with me when she was in prison.
Oh my goodness. So right there, that's trauma.
Absolutely.
In the womb. And I talk about that a lot. I talk about the different phases of trauma because there's so many different layers to trauma.
Absolutely.
You have your generational trauma, your community trauma, childhood trauma. And I just really noticed something while I was going through therapy and the trauma in the womb, with the way that I came into the world. And my situation of being the scarlet letter, right? And so oftentimes I talk to my mom and I ask her, were you sad? Were you embarrassed? Because all of those things I felt in the womb, like it's literally a real thing. And I think parents don't understand, especially moms, that when you're carrying an unborn child, everything that you go through, everything that you feel affects your womb.
Absolutely.
And so now you were born, your mom is incarcerated. How much longer was your mom incarcerated after you were born?
I'm not sure the exact time frame, but I do know that it was a while because she had to send me to someone else at the time.
Okay.
One of her friends who was considered my godmother at that time, she sent me to live with her. And from there, I believe I was everywhere. I was bounced around from place to place, family member to family member.
Because you grew up in foster care as well, right?
Right, but prior, this was even before I even entered foster care. So from what I remember living with my grandmother most of the time on my father's side. However, she had foster kids, and she was very money hungry. Okay. So she took me under foster care. Okay. Her blood grandchild. So she took me under foster care, and eventually she got too old and she started getting sick, so she couldn't take care of her foster kids anymore. So eventually everybody was moved out of her house, and that's when I was entered into different foster homes and different group homes.
Let's go to that moment. How did you feel? Did you feel abandoned? What were your emotions?
At the time, I couldn't pinpoint my emotions. That's something I was too young to even understand. But what I will say is, as looking back now and understanding my childhood trauma and the things I went through, I will say, yeah, I was abandoned. And now seeing how it shows in me in adulthood, I will say, yes, I was abandoned. Traumatized. Now that I really think about it, traumatized.
So, was there ever any reconciliation between you and mom?
Oh yeah. One thing about my mother, she was gonna find me regardless.
Okay.
So
pull up, mom. That's right. Pull up.
No matter where I was, we illegally saw each other.
Okay.
And my first foster mother, she was okay with it to the point where she would allow my mother to babysit me sometimes while she was at work.
How amazing is that? Because we hear stories about the foster care system. And a lot of times, and we're not going to say everybody, because I don't like to put everybody and generalize everybody. But a lot of times, we know that people are only in it for the money. We know that children get abused. We know that children get neglected. I've even read stories and know of friends who has been through the foster care system, and their foster parent has tied them up, neglected to feed them, and things of that nature. Did you, outside of your grandmother, did you experience any of that?
Absolutely. Even back to my grandmother, when I was living in her home, some of her foster kids would sexually abuse me.
Wow.
And then in my first foster home, it was all about an appearance. From the outside looking in, we were well taken care of, but behind closed door, we were abused. I still remember an instance where she pushed me down the steps. And it's a funny story because I was on my way out the door to leave for school, and my friends were at the door looking in, waiting for me, and they just saw me come tumbling down the steps. I can laugh about it now, but at the time it wasn't funny. But so yeah, I experienced a lot of abuse with her, physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse.
So let's talk about, if we can, the sexual abuse. A lot of times in our community, and it happens in other communities, but I'm going to talk about our community. We hear things like, that didn't happen, don't you tell anybody else, or the famous line, what goes on in this house stays in this house.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, were you verbal about your abuse?
I wasn't.
Okay.
Nope. That's one thing I never was really verbal until I became an adult. And that's when I started speaking out about it, because I feel like, how many other people are going through this? How many other kids are experiencing this? So I feel it's my duty to pay it forward.
Did you feel, the reason why, and I know it's a number of reasons that you probably weren't verbal, but did you feel like no one would believe you? Did you feel like if you told, something was going to happen to you?
I never even thought of it that way.
Okay.
At the time, there was no reason why I didn't say anything. I just didn't think to say anything.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, because when you're in the midst of trauma,
Absolutely.
your brain isn't operating right?
Right.
Because you're traumatized, but what it does, your brain is shutting down or stopping you from
Yep.
reliving.
Our brains can only take about 13 minutes of trauma.
Oh my gosh.
At the max.
Is that a lifetime? Or
in
just
a moment.
In a moment. Okay.
I would say, and yeah, our brains can only take about 13 minutes of trauma.
Okay.
After that, we're shutting down. You know, after that, we are suppressing it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're repressing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Okay. Whoa. Because I'm a learner and I'm a sponge. What's the difference between suppressing and repressing?
Repressing is unconscious.
Okay.
So repressing are those unconscious thoughts or those unconscious memories that we don't, you know, you may have to dig up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Suppression, we're doing it intentionally.
Okay.
So we're conscious about not talking about these things, not trying to remember these things, you know, not keeping it on the forefront of our minds.
Not trying to trigger ourselves.
Absolutely.
Is that a good word to use?
Yep.
Okay. See, I told you I go to therapy.
You know a little something. You know your stuff.
Because I'm healing.
Definitely.
And I remember just being broken. Life happens to everybody.
Absolutely.
Life has no respecter of person.
At all.
And nobody has that perfect life, right? And irregardless to who you are, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, life happens.
Definitely.
And when life happens, we have to know how to deal with it, or it's going to deal with us.
Yep.
So I was tired of being sick and tired of being tired and sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I was nasty, and I was mean, and I was unapproachable, and I was angry, and I was bitter, and I was broken. And I kept on saying, you just too dope for all this. Girl, get it together. But how do you get it together? You get what I'm saying? And so for me, my aha moment came getting ready for an event, and I was complaining. I don't have nothing to wear.
Mm-hmm.
And God was like, you tripping. You got 3 closets. You ungrateful. And it just started from there. And I looked in the mirror and he just got to telling me about myself. You're this, you're this, you're this, you're this. And you're going to go far, but we got to clean this up first.
Yep.
And I was like, well, dang. God just read me. You know what I'm saying? But a lot of times when we look into the mirror, we don't like to face what we really see.
Absolutely.
And so the other aspect of that was being angry with my parents for things that I thought that they should have done, for things that they didn't do. But when I started healing, I started understanding that my mother and father loved me
The way they knew how.
the way that they knew how. The best way that they knew how. And because I had experienced trauma, what trauma has happened in their life to stop them?
Yeah.
It's not because they didn't want to love me. It's because they didn't know how to properly love me or support me or things that I wanted to do, you know, like good example. And I'm 40 some years old, and I just stopped talking. This is how you know when you're healing. You stop talking about hurt things, right? Because you heal from it, legit heal from it. But I remember being in my 30s telling my mother, see, if you would have put me in piano lessons, you would never have to work again. Because I sing and I write music. And instead of my mother putting me in piano lessons, she was okay with me playing the French horn and the trumpet. I didn't want the French horn and the trumpet. If you would have gave me piano lessons, girl, I could have been Layla Hathaway. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could have been retired.
Absolutely.
And so I'm saying this to her, not realizing that it's coming from an angry, broken, disappointed place. Right? And so me saying it like just to be saying it, I was saying it as a weapon to hurt her. Like, you didn't pay enough attention to me. You know, I wanted to do this, and you didn't even think I was gifted enough to do what I wanted to do. But who believed in her? Who thought outside of the box and said, well, you know, this is fine, but this is where you're gifted at.
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's so true.
So now I understand, you know, I no longer weaponize those things.
Definitely.
And I don't want my mommy to feel bad, because now I'm a mom. And I'm a nana. And so I know what it feels like to be a parent. We don't always make the best decisions, We don't always say the right things, and we don't always do the right things. And the same grace I want my son and my grandchildren to give to me, I had to give to her. Yeah. So I don't think I said that in a long time. But when you're in therapy, it shows up in your life. Yeah. Do you say that sometimes? Like, Lord, therapy showing up in my life?
Oh, yeah. A lot of the times I also see a lot of my childhood showing up in my life. Okay. So I have to tame that immediately.
Okay. You know, now, when you say that, what do you mean by that?
The fact that, for instance, the fact that I didn't receive love as a child.
Okay.
I see how that shows up today. You know,
in your relationships.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Not just my intimate relationships, but my relationships with people and friends in general.
Yeah.
You know, and then to speak to what you said, you know, you used a lot of things to weaponize your mom. Mm-hmm. I used to do the same thing. I used to ask myself, or I would even say to other people, for someone who went through foster care themselves, why would they want to put their children through the same things?
So your mother was in foster care?
She was.
See, that's that generational trauma, though.
Yep.
That's that generational trauma. Because, see, here's the thing. And when we think about these things, I love this conversation already. When we think about these things and when we say generational trauma, let's give an example. Because we have viewers that probably has never thought about therapy. So when we say generational trauma, we're talking about your grandmother lived in the projects, and then your mother lived in the projects.
Absolutely.
And now you're an adult and you're living in the projects. And now your children are living in the projects.
At what point do you break those generational curses?
Oh my gosh.
And that
come on.
And I feel like that's my job right now, is to break those generational curses. I refuse to bring kids into this world until I can make sure that all those generational curses are broken. You know, because my mother didn't receive adequate love as a child. Right. So she didn't know how to effectively or properly love me.
Right.
So I can't necessarily blame her 100%.
Right.
But what I can do is break that curse, break that cycle.
Let's talk about that. Let's stay right there for a minute. Definitely. Because a lot of times I have said, and we just said, it's not that your parents didn't want to. It's that they didn't know how to. They weren't given the tools. Yeah. So let's go back to, because I'm going to say a little bit, but you're a whole lot younger than me. But I'm just going to say a little bit, because you're a millennial, right?
Correct.
Right, yeah, baby. You're a little bit younger than me. But let's go back to my grandmother's generation.
Okay.
Where our parents didn't receive the I love you. You know, because at that time, they were dealing with Jim Crow. At that time, they were dealing with civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? So it was a lot of hostility and uproar and people telling them that they weren't good enough.
Yeah.
You can't go to this school because you're black. You know, you can't come and sit at this restaurant counter because you're black. So how does a generation that has been beat down and told constantly that they're less than love their children the right way? You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that's where we get into that cultural or community trauma, right? Yep. And so I think about my big mom who grew up in the South, who went through the Jim Crow, who was mulatto, but her siblings were of darker complexion. And so it was a divide there because they couldn't do certain things, but she could pass because she was light enough to pass.
Right.
You know, and so you kind of think about how does the Jim Crow mentality or that the way that they were taught affect our families and generations to come. Because we even experience colorism within our families.
Oh, yeah.
And even within the black community, right?
Definitely.
And so you think about, you know, dang, my mom was working the fields as a kid and helping her mom raise her sister's kids and her siblings and doing this. When did Big Mama ever stop and tell my mom, you're important to me. I love you. You're going to go somewhere in life. And it's not that she didn't want to, probably.
She didn't, two things. She didn't know how to. One, she probably didn't know how to effectively communicate that.
Right.
And show her that. Two, she probably didn't know if that was true. based on everything that was going on around her. She, she didn't know if she was speaking truth into her.
There was no hope. And I can only imagine how they felt. And I don't think people this generation understand how blessed we are and how much freedom we have compared to back then, right?
Definitely.
But my big mama couldn't read or write. Her signature was an X. So how do you tell your child that education is important when you were never educated? You see what I'm saying? And so I think a lot of times we don't look at the big picture. We don't look at the broader picture. We just play the blame game.
Absolutely.
But it comes to that point in time, like what you said, who's going to break the generational curse? So you were the curse breaker.
I am.
You better say it.
I still am. And, my brother and I, we have this conversation quite often. We always say that we're going to break that curse. My brother, he has a family now.
How amazing is that? How many years apart are you and your brother?
A lot. He's the oldest.
Oh, he's the oldest.
Yeah, we always talk about breaking those generational curses and not being to our kids what our mother was to us. Granted, like we said, that's all she knew. But we know better. We know different. We're in a different time. We know different, so we can do better if we know better.
If you don't mind me asking, where was your father?
My father, he had passed away a week before I was born.
Really? Literally came into this world
alone.
Trauma, turmoil, letdown, heartbreak.
Yep.
Was he murdered?
I'm not sure the full story, but I don't believe he was murdered. But like you said, we there are those, like you said, that trauma from the womb. I came from that trauma from the womb, but then I came into childhood trauma immediately.
Right. And so when you think about the family or the dynamics of the Black family, it looks a little different than what it was when my grandparents was growing, where we might have same-sex marriages, right? And it's a lot of, I don't want to say afraid, people are afraid to live out loud. And what I mean by that is I grew up in the church, right? And so we already know how the church feels about homosexuality, right? Like there isn't any other sins that people are committing, And I get frustrated a lot because I don't know how I would feel if I was gay, lesbian, bi, or trans, and someone was to tell me that God didn't love me. And so a lot of times I think about those things because before I was who I am now, I was a fornicator, I was promiscuous, still directing the church choir, still going Sunday school, still showing up for Bible study. And the church had a problem with it, but it wasn't that big of a problem because it wasn't the same sex. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So when I have these conversations, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Okay.
When I have these conversations, my question to everybody is, what's so different about your sin versus my sin? Because sin is sin.
Absolutely.
There's no greater or no lesser unless you're doing blasphemy, right?
Right.
So when we have these real conversations and I keep hearing the uproar from the faith community of bashing and not accepting or embracing, it's a problem for me because I never want anybody to feel unloved. You get what I'm saying? And so as a mental health psychotherapist, I know sometimes you have those tough conversations about religion, and because you do a lot of work in the LGBTQ community.
Right.
How do you handle those conversations?
So are you saying in sessions or in general?
Just in general.
In general, I'm a love all type of person.
Right.
So anything that I feel is going against that, I'm not having a conversation.
Okay.
I'm excusing myself.
Okay.
Because that's not what I promote.
Okay.
And that's not the brand I'm trying to put out.
Okay.
There, so it's equality.
All across the board.
Absolutely.
Whether you agree with it, like it, dislike it. Because can I just be honest with you? I'm heterosexual, right?
Right.
Meaning I like men, right? But what I do in my bedroom is my business.
Definitely.
So I feel like people should mind their business, you know? And so just even as a heterosexual woman, I'm just not going to come out and say, oh, I got some last night. Now, if I'm talking to my homegirls, that might be a little bit different.
Story, right.
But nobody's coming up to me asking me about my sexual preference because I'm heterosexual. So I feel that they should give everyone else the same respect. What people do in their bedrooms is their business.
Or in their life period.
Do you think that this generation has a problem with minding their business?
Yes, and I say social media plays a huge role.
Are you on social media?
I am on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
As well as LinkedIn, but that stops there.
Right.
But I almost, a lot of the things we see on social media, we see that it seems it's almost as if we know people's business.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in all reality, we only know what people share with us. We
Right.
only know what people allow us to know.
We only know what people post to be.
Absolutely. Right. So, and we see a lot of different celebrities and,
Mm-hmm.
you see a lot of the lifestyle that they're living
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people want to live that. So it seems cool.
Mm-hmm.
It seems intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're following that journey. We're following people's lifestyles when it looks like they're living a certain lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we think we know what's going on, but in all reality,
We don't really
we truly
know.
don't know.
We really don't know. Now, as a Black male therapist,
Mm-hmm.
you're one of the most sought out people of this time.
Definitely.
And I often say we need more because a lot of our kings that's starting to say, okay, I need therapy, want a therapist who look like them.
Yep.
Want a therapist that can relate to cultural things. It's a difference. I'm from Michigan.
Okay.
So I went to school with white people, Latino people, Black people. One of my best friends is a white girl. Well, was a white girl in elementary. Excuse me. So Carrie and I were very close growing up. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever made the difference in between us. She slept at my house. I slept at her house. We ate. We went out. We had fun.
Right.
And so now, when I think about my childhood and the cultural difference, Carrie's family ate dinner at the table every night. My mom and us, we ate dinner at the table every night. But family members who were probably a little bit less fortunate than us, mm-hmm. they never sat at the table and broke bread together. So when I became an adult, mm-hmm. I started breaking bread with my son. And I did it a little differently than my mom. That was my time to get into his business. How's school going? What's up? You got a little girlfriend? What them grades look like? But now, this generation, we've gotten rid of some traditions of breaking bread together.
And you know what? I'm glad you touched on that because what you did with your child, you showed him that it's okay to express how you feel. It's okay mm-hmm. to express yourself. The problem is with men today, we feel that we can't express ourselves. You ever hear somebody say, be strong, keep your head up?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Why do you gotta be strong?
We hear that as Black people all the time.
Right, especially men.
I was going to say especially Black women, but see, that's our truth as individuals.
Right, I was going to say more so men
mm-hmm.
because men are looked at as the strong person.
Yeah, you're not supposed to cry.
Right, the dominant
mm-hmm.
force. But why? Why does a man have to stay strong
Absolutely.
when he's human? Before
right.
he's a man, he's a human being.
Absolutely.
Right? Meaning he has emotions,
mm-hmm.
he has feelings,
mm-hmm.
he has triggers,
mm-hmm.
the same things that everyone else have in life.
Mm-hmm.
So why do he have to stay strong? So
I don't think that people should have to stay strong.
Absolutely. And by you staying strong, that means don't express yourself. Don't express your emotions. You're supposed to be dominant.
Hold that anger in.
Mm-hmm. And then when people hold that anger in, they hold that trauma in, it turns into displacement. And that's where we see active shooters. That's where we see people lashing out on the roads for no reason. People just lashing out at other people. We see a lot of different. It turns into different things.
Mm-hmm. Different, and not just different things, deadly things.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so What would you tell our Black kings? Like, they're watching and someone is wrestling. I don't need therapy. I know you hear that so much. I ain't going to tell nobody my business.
Yeah.
I'm not talking. But that's the stigma from what goes on in this house. Listen, not just the house, not a building, but this house.
Absolutely.
What goes on in this house stays in this house.
Yeah.
And so you're holding on to the trauma. You're holding on to the turmoil. You're holding on to the disappointment, the anger, the resentment, the bitterness. And then you tick like a ticking time bomb and
at the smallest thing.
Oh, and I like to call those moments a pass me the salt moment. Pass me the salt.
Yes.
Right?
For no reason.
For no reason. Because you're harboring.
Absolutely.
But let's talk, because it's just so much to talk about. Let's talk about why our men act that way. Is it because we don't create safe places for you all?
That's one aspect.
Okay, well, talk to me about it, because we about to fix this.
A lot of times you see women bashing men.
Okay.
How's that a safe space?
Right.
You know?
Okay, but when we say bashing, we got to give examples. Because see, here's the thing, because I want us to get it together.
Let's take this for example. Now, in the time we're in now, everything is about money. What can you do for me? What can you buy me? Everything is about superficial things. So it's like, if he can't buy me this, so he's broke. When in all reality, that may not be the case.
Right.
So
he might just be a good steward over his money, and he might just be paying his bills on time, and he might. You see what I'm saying?
So how are you a safe space if that's all you're looking for? If that's all you're putting out there?
Wow.
And then also men as well deal with childhood trauma, generational trauma, community trauma, especially in Baltimore. Growing up in Baltimore, you see that a lot.
Baltimore rough.
Yeah.
When I first moved to Baltimore 20-some years ago, and I'm from Flint, Michigan, honey, I thought we was rough.
Yeah.
Because we goons too, right? But honey, when I moved to Baltimore, I was like, oh, no. I mean, because it was a different culture for me.
Yeah.
Because the row houses, I grew up in a single family house. We got driveways and yards, and I was like,
culture shock, right?
It was a culture shock, right? Really, literally. And so the mere fact that everybody is out and about and is chicken boxes and chicken bones everywhere, and I kept on saying, that's why y'all got rats. Everybody just eating and throwing stuff. So it was, and people kept on saying, y'all don't have, I'll be like, no. And if we do, we don't see them. You know, in Michigan, they just not walking up the street like they are down at the Inner Harbor, greeting you like, hey, you know. So it was a shock. I actually fell down the steps. I will never forget this. Running from a mouse. It was hopping down the stairs. And I'm just coming down the stairs and next, tumbled all the way down the stairs, tore my leg up. I had to get my leg in a brace and everything. And so it was then when somebody was like, well, you know, you live in a row house and whatever your neighbors have, you're going to have. And so that's why you came to the country today, because I left the city, right?
Nothing wrong with that.
Right. But I enjoy the city because that's where the culture is.
Right.
So I'll go visit. I'll go give me a chicken box. I'll go give me a half and half. Honey, I might ride past Lexington Market, right? Yeah. And so, because you really don't get a good chicken box until you go into the city, because they ain't got none out here in the country, right? So I have to go in the city every once in a while, but I couldn't imagine. I said all of that to say I couldn't imagine growing up in Baltimore, especially in the 80s and the 90s during the crack pandemic. You get what I'm saying? So I can only imagine what it was that our communities were going through, because Flint communities were going through the same thing. You once had vibrant, beautiful neighborhoods, and then here comes crack cocaine, and now everybody's strung out. You know, and it was criminal for us. Now, I'm going to ask you about that because I talk about it a lot. So let's get to the 80s, because your mother was a drug abuser.
Right.
And in the 80s and the 90s, crack hit our communities and left us for dead.
Yeah.
It took away our mothers, our fathers, our grandparents, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters. It had no respect of person. It was criminal. And you got a long sentence behind it. Let's talk about the opiate.
The opioid.
Yes! How it's less criminal, and it's more medical now? Like, for instance, they sent our parents to prison.
Mm-hmm.
They're sending them to rehab. And it's not criminal.
Right.
It's more of a health crisis now.
Honestly, I think they couldn't gain a control on it, so it's almost normalized now.
Okay.
And of course, let's not sit here and act like the color of our skin doesn't matter.
Okay.
So, you know.
Okay, because I like having real conversations. Okay. Come on.
So, yeah, I do believe that it's almost normalized now because it's such, I mean, think about it. If they arrested every single person who they caught with drugs, our prisons would be overpopulated, right?
Right.
Or more overpopulated than they are.
With not just black people.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you feel now that you're a voice and an advocate and on a mission, because that you are, do you feel as if your mom would have had the help that is offered now back then, that things probably would be different for you?
Absolutely. I think
the resources.
Yeah, I think if the times were different, absolutely. It's funny because my first career path was in the criminal justice field. I started as a probation officer, and I did that because when my mother got me back, I was 15, and she was clean, she was doing everything she was supposed to do, but she would have to visit her probation officer, and I would go with her, and I enjoyed how that person helped her. So I said, I'm going to do that.
So that's how you got into the criminal justice? Because we was going to get there, because I was going to run, because his resume is extensive.
Yeah.
And he's a young black king that's out here getting it. So you literally became a probation officer because your mom to go check in. I had a probation officer. So I know how intense those things can be.
Yeah.
You got a job. Either you have a job or you should be looking for one. And they ain't playing with you.
Nope.
And my probation officer, her name was Carol Gardner. She saved my life. And the thing that she told me was, you are so gifted, but you are your worst enemy. That mouth is either going to make you a lot of money or it's going to get you in trouble. And never forget that I will lock your black. And she told me that every chance that she got. Okay. And I was like, okay. At first my attitude was nasty. But the more that she talked to me and the more she built me up, there was a level of respect. She's one of my favorite people. I see her all the time. And she always says, I knew you was going to be somebody. I just had to help get you there.
You said something important. You said the more she built you up. You didn't have your parents building you up.
Right.
They didn't build you up.
Right.
So you sought that in your probation officer, and that's how you received that. And now look at you today.
I'm talking about a strong black queen. And I was so angry with that woman. I was like, this, I was calling her all types of names. But she's one of my favorite people. I send her birthday gifts.
Right.
And I'm talking about 20-some years ago, because she helped save my life.
Absolutely.
Listen, this conversation is getting good. Don't go nowhere. We're coming back. We're coming back. We're coming back. This was part 1. We haven't even touched the surface. Get ready for part 2. I am talking black men and mental health with mental health psychotherapist Deshaun Harris. We'll be right back. Make sure you tune in to part 2. Let's talk about it, Tyra Hill Show. On part 2 of Black Men and Mental Health. Earlier on in the conversation, we were talking about safe places for black men. And I heard what you said. Because a lot of times we listen, but we don't hear. And I want you to know, and not just you, even to my male fans who said, well, you're always talking about black women and mental health. What about us men? So I wanted to bring you on, but I hear you, kings, and I see you, kings. And I want to know, how can we as women, not just your wives, your lovers, your girlfriends, your boo thing, your side piece, your sisters, your aunts, your cousins, how can we create a safe place for you all? Because the world is harsh, and we're seeing our black men are struggling emotionally and mentally. And so what can we do as the village to support you guys?
I think the first thing is understanding that mental health is real.
Okay.
Mental health is a real thing, and people battle their mental health each and every day, have real mental health issues. So, being okay with that and being pro mental health, because a lot of times what I see is a male could suffer from mental health issues, but their significant other doesn't support that. They don't help them with that. They don't help them through it, or they don't, believe in it. So understanding that mental health is real, and if you feel like if your partner, you feel like your partner's suffering from something that you just can't understand, try to help them get therapy. Things that try to help them find a suitable therapist. Encourage that, because the thing is, a lot of males aren't going to say they need it. A lot of men aren't going to take the first step or the initiative. So if a lot of women should encourage that for them and push them to do that, because that's helping them.
Right. And when we say encourage, because we got to be plain, and when we say push, we mean in a loving way.
Absolutely.
We don't mean, there is no way that you can build up someone and tear them down at the same time.
Right.
Am I right about it?
You're right about it.
So what we're saying is, if your man is having outbursts, he's withdrawing, he's not the same, it is not the time, queens,
To tear him down.
to tear that man down. You changed. What's wrong with you? It should go a little something like this. Can I act like you?
Yeah.
Baby, I've noticed that some things are wrong. You're quiet. You're withdrawn. Let's talk about it. What's up? Create a safe place.
Definitely.
Right? And even if you don't like what they got to say, that ain't the time to pop off and y'all know how we get to rolling. I can't roll my neck because my bum was heavy. Rolling our necks. Listen. And shut up. Just shut up and listen. And not just listen with your ears, listen with your heart.
And pay attention to those behavioral patterns. Like you just said, if you know that this person was this way before, and now he's this way, pay attention to that.
Because we say stuff like this, and it be dumb stuff too. I had to stop myself from cussing sometimes. It be dumb stuff. You don't look like you depressed. You ain't depressed.
What does depression look like?
Oh, come on now, especially when we mask it up.
A lot of people are high-functioning depressed.
Come on now, high-functioning depressed. So what does that look like?
That looks like your regular everyday life. They're doing everything in their regular routine. They could be having a good time in front of you, but when they go home or when they get into their own safe haven, it's a different story.
And that was me before I started therapy. Life of the party. You don't want to miss part 2 of this conversation. Be sure to tune in to part 2 of Black Men and Mental Health. On the Tyra Hill Show. Let's talk about it. Tyra Hill Show.